All right, guys. So let's talk about what's going on with some geopolitical recent events. First, maybe we'll start with the foreign politics, and then we'll talk about the domestic. So, what do you think, Jamal?
Yeah, well, I
What?
mean, I think there are three major issues that have been prominent, I guess, in recent weeks. The one is the totally bonkers kidnapping of the president of Venezuela, who's currently awaiting trial, and the whole thing is just nuts. Um, then there's the war with Iran 2.0 that didn't actually happen. Hopefully, won't happen, but who knows? And then there's the ongoing Greenland saga. I heard that various EU countries deployed token, or I guess European NATO countries deployed token uh, troops to Greenland to act as a tripwire in case the U.S. actually does invade it. So I think those three elements are they're all pretty surreal and will require a bit of uh, contemplation to really figure out what the fuck is going on.
All right, can I add one more? I just remembered
Yeah, sure.
there's the recent turn in developments in the Ukraine-Russia situation where, if I'm not mistaken, I think Putin basically said, "Look, for us, this is like looking like a last battle on our front door. It can't go any farther. This is already sort of the end. So if the Europeans keep sending money and troops, if you send troops into Ukraine, we're done. We're just going to fucking nuke Germany and we're going to nuke the UK." And then the next day, no kidding, the next day, Friedrich Merz is like, "Look, we need to find a new path. Russia is a European country. We need to sort this out peacefully. We can do this." It was amazing. It's crazy. Meanwhile, the Brits, I mean, they're just like unfazed, just complete collision course plotted. So I want to add that too.
All right.
So that can go into the Greenland NATO
Yeah,
mess.
I think that's probably the place for it. The European dynamics.
All right, so
With regard to
Venezuela.
yeah, with regard to Venezuela and Iran, I think that the dynamic is very similar here, which is that Trump is obviously increasingly senile. Like, I'm not sure he's quite as far along as Biden was, but he's pretty far along. Um, and he's surrounded by advisors who think that now's their opportunity to really lobby him to enact the policy that they want. The Secretary of State is Marco Rubio. He's obviously a Gusano, like Cuban emigre, who is obsessed with toppling left wing regimes in Latin America. And so it seems that that wing of the administration's real pet project is um, just escalating military intervention throughout Latin America to topple first Venezuela, presumably next Cuba. People are talking about Mexico already toppling Scheinbaum. Um, this is crazy, but they seem to have gotten their way with Venezuela. The whole scheme is just so harebrained.
Hmm.
Like they topple Maduro, they don't topple the government. The Socialist Party or whatever that party is called in Venezuela. I think it's like the United Socialist Party or something. Is still in power. The talk of Delcy Rodriguez, the vice president who's currently the acting president, being some kind of American agent seems to not really have any basis. It seems more like wishful thinking on the part of pro regime change um, commentators. Um, Maduro's in New York City. The charges against him are like just clearly nuts. Like one of the charges is possession of automatic weapons, and it's
Yeah.
like he's the president. First off, he's the president of a country. Of course, he possesses automatic weapons, and secondly, he possessed those weapons in Venezuela. So it's not American gun laws don't even have jurisdiction over those weapons.
Hmm.
Um, so it's really giving rise to the real possibility that he may be acquitted in New York City. At which point, what was the whole point of this? And even if he's not acquitted, I think For Maduro, it's bad news that he's stuck in New York City, presumably in prison. But for the Venezuelan government, like this is great PR. Like this is going to result in a rally around the flag effect. It's not weakening the regime at all, or the legitimate government of Venezuela. So that seems to be that's just my read on the situation. It seems like Trump's an idiot. Marco Rubio is only slightly less of an idiot. And Marco Rubio was able to lobby Trump to get his plan enacted. His plan is really dumb, and this is what we're observing.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I mean, there are a couple different ways to look at it, but all of them seem to give the same impression that, at the end of an empire, there are the people around who are really committed to it, but it's not quite what they fantasized that it was in the past. And the more they try to save it, the more they wreck it with their schemes, because ultimately they're just sort of deeply foolish. Um, and I'm just thinking like, you know, what do you think happened? By the way, it's the United Socialist Party of Venezuela. It does seem that the control of that party is consolidated the more that the government of the United States tries to control the country, the more it makes its people support its government in opposition to America. But I've heard a few different things, and I don't know. I mean, there's no real way of knowing, perhaps, but some people are saying that there was this bounty on Maduro's head. There was so much money offered that they basically bought off portions of the government in order to sell him out, so that the air defense guns wouldn't go off, to stand down orders, let them come in. And then the only people who defended him, so I've heard, were these 32 Cuban officers, like a retinue of special kind of forces, I guess. Um, so he was betrayed, basically. And then one thought I
Yeah,
have there is that, that could trigger as kind of trigger an internal conflict in Venezuela between the loyalists and the traitors. But on the other hand, I heard someone say that what might have happened was, I mean, Maduro was ready to give everything that Rubio and Trump were demanding, anyways. And so the loyalist Chavistas in the core of the government, who are all still there, as you rightly note, they might have thought, if this guy's going to give it all to America just to stay president, let's just do this without him. Like, it's
right.
possible that he was betrayed because he wasn't, because the people are not less loyal but more loyal to the program, in which case this really wouldn't have done any good. And the only way you're going to get rid of him is a ground invasion, but that is going to really be they will fall on their sword hardcore if they open up something like Vietnam like that right on the back door, because the immigration problem, all those problems will just be turned up to 11.
No, no, I agree completely. I mean, I think an actual invasion of Venezuela is just not feasible. Like it's a big country. It's a huge fucking jungle. Like there's no way the U.S. can do any sort of meaningful, boots on the ground operation there. Um, I don't know how to view the kind of talk of potential internal traitors in the United Socialist Party. It seems like maybe they stood down because they realized it was pointless to try to to escalate the situation. Maybe there were kind of treacherous elements, but I will say that if I were uh, the other members of the ruling party, I would not be all that upset with Maduro's personal ouster because he hasn't been particularly effective. Now, given, he's been operating under sanctions, so his hands are tied. There's limited room for him to actually be an effective president, but it doesn't seem like he's been particularly effective. He's certainly not a Chavez level figure. He doesn't seem to be a kind of steady hand at the tiller like the president of Cuba. What's his name? Diaz Canal, I think. Um, so if I'm a part of the Politburo or equivalent body, and it's kind of like, well, we can't force Maduro out. That would be too troublesome. He
Hmm.
probably still has a significant base of support in the trade unions and so forth. But if the Americans come along and get rid of him for us, and we just reshuffle the leadership. Maybe that's not the end of the world, right? And Maduro can do what he does best, which is grandstand for the cameras in New York for the next however many years while his trial goes on, right? Um, Maybe that kind of calculus was at play. I mean, that's total speculation, but I could see that kind of making sense.
Mm. Yeah, it's hard to say. It's hard to say what's really going on. There's no way to know, but it does seem like, look at like Stephen Miller's comments about this and all these people. It just seems like I don't I hesitate, sometimes people say that, our leaders are stupid, they're idiots, they're incompetent, and that can be misleading. I remember hearing Michael Parenti once say, they're not stupid. They're your enemy. Don't underestimate them.
Well,
Um,
sometimes they are stupid.
well, that's the thing. I mean, these they do seem really fucking stupid, and they've got the like biggest empire in human history, and they're just wrecking it. They're just, like if they actually try to mess with Cuba and Venezuela, Colombia, and all this stuff, they're just making everyone in the world into enemies, trying to force people to do shit we want them to do that they don't want to do. They're just isolating us and making us look themselves, right? Because we're just along for the ride, the normal people. We have to disaggregate nations into classes. They're in charge. They're acting in what they think is their interest, and we're just sort of getting dragged along in the train of it. But it seems like I mean they are killing their own golden goose, it seems.
I mean, yeah, this is what late imperial decadence is, right? It's where the ruling class is so soft, so unaccountable, so kind of high on its own supply that it no longer recognizes that its actions could actually, as you say, kill the golden goose. Could they think the golden goose is immortal, that you can do whatever you want to it? It'll just keep clucking. And yeah, I mean, at a certain point, you do actually kill the golden goose, and that's because the people you have in charge of your empire are just so stupid and so short sighted and so self interested, perhaps, that they just don't understand. They don't understand any of this. They don't understand geopolitics. They don't, like I was reading an article the other day about how George H.W. Bush had a one of Chiang Kai-shek's swords, and
God.
this found its way into the possession of Jeb Bush, who then gave it to Marco Rubio. But neither Jeb Bush nor Marco Rubio realized that Chiang Kai-shek was a real person. They thought he was like a just some mythical Chinese
Oh my
warrior or
God.
something. And so they they talk about this sword as though it's like a legendary relic, right? Journey to the West or something. This shows the rapid decline in competence of the elite, like from a president who, of course, he knew who Chiang Kai-shek was, and he knew presumably what the ideological difference was between Chiang Kai-shek and the Communist Party and so on and so forth, to a current ruling class that just doesn't know. They just don't know.
Yeah, I mean the irony, and I just keep getting hit by this irony though, because I mean they think they're trying to save it, but the way that they're trying to save it is what destroys it. And I can't help but think it's because, a nation consists of a couple different classes, and the one who's making these decisions is always the sort of ruling owner class with its sort of bootlicking professional managerial lackeys who are controlling things for them. But they're from their interest perspective, like they're probably thinking like, okay, this is going down. We're losing our free lunch. Try to save the free lunch. And that's what's motivating them to do things which ultimately destroy it. And then from their perspective, like, if we can't have our free lunch, then this isn't worth it anyway. So fuck it. But the fact that we're just along for the ride, I mean, from our vantage point, it's like, guys, if you could just, mitigate your rapacious desire for like everything everywhere. Um, the sweet deal you got could go on. That could be, maybe perhaps that's false. Maybe there are deep structural forces that are really going to end it, and that maybe they see something we don't see. But it, at least on the face of it, seems like there was a sort of, I don't know, kind of geopolitical balance of forces, and it looks like the neocons and the rest of them saw that, Russia was not going to be beaten into submission, and when China develops, it wasn't going to become like us. And then they thought, oh fuck, we don't have the unipolar moment isn't going to last forever, and that's when they're like overdrive. We have to take everything or bust.
I think with regard to the Venezuela stuff, my intuition is that a guy like Marco Rubio who's pushing this, I don't think he thinks the US is on the way out, you know? Like I don't think he thinks the golden goose is, I think he's just like a total moron who thinks that, well, the US is the superpower, we're the best, like we can do whatever we want. And finally, we have someone in a position to do what the reactionary, Latin American emigre lobby in Miami has wanted to do for ages, which is just go in and take out these commies and
Hmm.
give all the give us all our plantations and our slaves back, and well, everything will be fine. Um, I think the thought process that you lay out, where they realize the empire is on its last legs and now's our chance to go for broke, or we're not going to have this chance again. I think that's the Iran situation. I think
Hmm.
that that is the situation that Netanyahu, the Israelis, the Israel lobby, like they understand that the US is in an increasingly precarious position and Israel is an increasingly precarious position in the Middle East. And
Hmm.
this is what they think we need to do this now, or we're not going to be able to do it in the future. And that's why they keep trying to do it. And it is somewhat miraculous that it went down the way it did, because it seems like at least the Israelis, really thought that there was going to be an invasion. Like they had convinced themselves that now's the moment. They activated all their sleeper cells. They activated all their the color revolution playbook that they had, sort of in on the inside in Iran. All those people went on the streets. There were kind of oh, sure. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, Dan.
Yeah. Just one more thing about Venezuela before we move on, because I think you're right. If there is that sentiment that this is the last shot, go for it. It's that's got to do with Iran. It did just dawn on me though that I have also heard there are people factions in the different the cliques in the state. Some of them are saying things like the jig is up globally. The global empire is done. Expect de-dollarization. And what we have to do is retreat to the Western Hemisphere and do this Monroe Doctrine thing, where basically we lord over all of the Western Hemisphere, totally control everything in Latin America, Canada. And then, I actually heard RFK say this in a speech, or it was an interview maybe. What do? He says we retreat to the Western Hemisphere and we arm ourselves to the teeth, but the days of the global empire are over. So I think some people are doing this, and Venezuela is being looked at like this. Like that's basically our oil because things are getting uncertain elsewhere. So actually, I might have to walk that back a little bit. What I said, they don't all think that
Mm.
this thing. They do seem to be retreating to the Monroe Doctrine type approach. But I mean, that leads me to ask the one last thing about Venezuela. I've heard people say the expectation is that the current government, I can't remember, what is her name?
Delcy Rodriguez.
Delcy Rodriguez and the Chavistas there, they're the only credible group within Venezuela. And so the Rubio and the rest don't want to topple them because it would just destabilize the situation. And this is, I guess, how they think they're different from Bush and Cheney. But the idea being like she's the only one that the people actually like. Machado, the people don't sufficiently like that she could rule. She couldn't actually win an election, despite the fact that they said she lost an election. And so they want to use this United Socialist Party of Venezuela without Maduro to function as a kind of like social reconsolidation of imperialism, if you like, to get the people to buy in to being sort of colonized and sell this package of goods to the people because they're the only ones with the credibility, the legitimacy. And of course, if they do that, they'll lose that last shred. But the idea would be to turn Chavismo into the local comprador group. Um, do you see that
Yeah,
happening?
I could see, if there's anyone with a brain kind of developing this policy, I could see that being what they kind of hope will happen, like that they'll be able to actually make some inroads in the party apparatus. They'll be able to corrupt it from the inside and so on and so forth. But I mean, you look at what happened in Vietnam, right? Like the US has very good relations with the Vietnamese Communist Party at this point, because the Vietnamese started to view China as a more serious regional threat. But the Vietnamese Communist Party is not at all compromised by pro-American comprador elements, right? Like that's just not the case, right? I think that the ability of the um, the ability of the Americans to actually uh, corrupt an organization like that is pretty limited. You know, they can corrupt individuals, sure, and they've done this in various Latin American countries. Like they did that with the former president of Ecuador, Lenin Moreno, I think, who was a leftist. He came to power as kind of the anointed successor of Raul Correa, and the Americans obviously had some sort of dirt on him or something, and they just totally, you know, seized him, right, and controlled him. But they didn't control the party. His party immediately rejected him and went to war against him, basically. I don't think that the U.S. really can has the clout to kind of to corrupt a mass membership party like this.
I see. All right. So yeah, it probably wouldn't work. Probably is wishful thinking. But so Iran. What's your take on Iran then? Sorry to interrupt that last bit.
Yeah, sure. I mean, like I was saying, I think the Israelis really thought this was going to happen. They thought maybe like last time, well, if we just kind of pull the trigger, the Americans will back us up, right? And so they activated all their cells. They did the Color Revolution playbook, and then they started having their operatives like kill people and attack people, you know, to just sort of like attacking people at the protests that they themselves had organized, right? In order to make it seem like it was the security forces doing it, or I don't know what, right? But just to spread chaos and fear, uncertainty, and doubt, right? Um, but then the U.S. didn't do anything. You know, the protests have petered out. The Iranians shut down the internet and then left Starlink online and then arrested everyone using Starlink and then shut down Starlink. So they got a lot of people. They got a lot of you know assets. The Israelis presumably spent many years building up. And they're all being tortured in prison right now. And they're presumably giving up more names. And the Israeli press has been saying stuff like, "Oh, what um, the Iranians said, we'll start executing your operatives on live TV if you bomb us, and that's what stopped Netanyahu from bombing them." Who knows if that's true, right? But um, the who I don't really understand what happened here, but I could see just like Trump just kind of being like, "Meh," changed his mind the last minute, and then left the Israelis to out to dry. Um, but yeah, just a another shambolic adventure.
Yeah, I wonder how many times they're going to do this. And you said they had all this capital, political capital build up. It took years to get people things arranged in there. And I also heard that last time with the whatever the events that kicked off the so-called 12-day war, all these agents inside um, suddenly causing all this trouble with drones and so forth. I mean, I wonder when they're going to finally use up all that capital. Otherwise, when it'll be spent. But they just don't seem to understand. I don't, well, this is the thing. Actually, this is one of the things I wanted to talk about. Is it a lack of comprehension, or is it just, or is it, that I'm not understanding something? They might just not give a shit. I often have this sense, like what I was about to say was they just don't understand geopolitics. Like Christopher Mott said when he was on the program the other day talking about Iran, he said, Iran will always be this way because of geography. Geography is fate. No matter which government is there, it's going to have certain interests because it has certain neighbors and certain material assets. And that's never going to change. For the purposes of our politics, our lifetimes, in the horizon of our lifetimes, our maybe children or grandchildren, it's never going to change. No matter if you do a decapitation strategy, no matter what you do, you haven't changed the structure of the geopolitical system and the Earth's distribution of material assets, which determine people's interests. And so that's when I start to think, okay, these people don't just don't get it. They think you can just get rid of a leader and you're going to, like that'll be the silver bullet, like that'll be the magic move. And but then, okay, maybe, maybe I'm just not understanding. Maybe they just don't give a shit and they're just gonna do, throw it all at the wall and see what sticks. But I just, I don't, I can't understand exactly. It just seems like, they're breaking shit in a tantrum. Like it doesn't seem like it's ever going to be effective. It seems like they don't know what they're doing and we're just sort of bystanders in collateral damage.
I think that the Israeli American policy in the Middle East has been um, that if you control the leadership of neighboring countries, you can actually prevent them from acting in the interests of, they're in their own actual geostrategic interests, right? And the crown in their cap is Egypt, because the US has spent billions and billions and billions of dollars to control the Egyptian military government, which then acts in Israel's interests as a regional partner, right? And they think, well, if we can do it with Egypt, why can't we do it with Iran? You know, um, there are various reasons why Egypt and Iran are two, uh, Iran is much less vulnerable to military attack than Egypt is. Egypt is flat. The entire population's on the Nile. They have the dam that they stupidly built that you can bomb and flood the entire country. Um, Iran is completely mountainous, huge problems getting, land troops in there, et cetera. The population is more spread out, people, et cetera. Like there are tons of reasons why it wouldn't actually work in Iran, but I think this is what they want, right? And they've already got similar situations in Jordan. They think they're building something similar in Syria. And then there's the Gulf monarchies. And this is actually an interesting dynamic that happened quite suddenly. I don't know if you've been following this whole thing with Somaliland and the
Not so much.
UAE.
Not
So this
enough.
is peripherally related to the Iran thing, but it intersects in kind of strange ways. So the UAE is sort of Israel's strongest partner in the region. The UAE basically works hand in glove with the Israelis. They support the same rebel groups in various countries, like in Sudan, the RSF, the Rapid Support Forces. That's the UAE Israeli supported rebel group. Somaliland is the kind of UAE Israeli supported rebel breakaway province in Somalia. Um, and then in Yemen they supported sort of a particular militia group. Um, the Saudis have been pretty friendly historically to the UAE and to Israel, um, particularly in recent years. But all of a sudden, the Saudis just turned on the UAE, attacked their positions in Yemen, basically forced them out of Yemen, um, broke with the UAE on the whole Somaliland recognition thing. It seems like there is an actual split going on here where the Saudis are realigning away from the American Israeli security axis towards a new axis involving Turkey, Egypt, and Pakistan. They're talking about a Muslim NATO or something, or at least a Sunni NATO. This is all very sudden and very. I mean, when the 12-Day War happened, I think the writing was on the wall for the American security umbrella that, of course, all the regional partners are going to be like, oh, I don't know about this. This is looking like a bad long-term bet, right? To yoke our security strategy to this declining hegemon and this sort of insane settler state. We kind of need other options. And it looks like the other options are maybe coming to fruition, right? And the interesting thing about this, the Turkey, Turkey's in NATO. Egypt is historically an American puppet state. Saudi is also historically an American puppet state. Pakistan is China's number one geostrategic ally. Like this is the only country that China has like a defense pact with is Pakistan. So yeah, this is interesting. If like Pakistan is now um, the linchpin of a new security apparatus that has a direct connection to China, suddenly Turkey and Saudi and Egypt have a connection to China as well indirectly, and they can switch, they can defect to the rising superpower as they have like a seamless way to defect to the rising superpower as they abandon their confidence in the American security strategy. So it's been very, very odd.
Mm. So just going back a second to the rationale behind these political actions, for instance, of Israel, it sounds like basically the reasoning is something like the cargo cult reasoning. Like there was a day once when we did something and then something we liked happened. Therefore, if we do that thing again, what we like will happen again. So, do what we did in Egypt and we'll have a government that does what we want and control it. And we can just sort of universally replicate that. Like, the guy in the schoolyard who does a trick on his skateboard and impresses people thinks that that's how you impress people, and
Right.
so he does that for the rest of his life and just looks like a maniac. Um, so something like this, basically, is that that's the error?
Uh, I mean, yeah, I think it's like, the co-optation of Egypt and Saudi occurred during the Cold War when the U.S. was kind of winning, right? And it was like this was a major victory in the Cold War for the U.S. It probably involved like just the entire, foreign policy apparatus, the CIA, everyone thinking about this, finessing this, like making it happen, right? Um, to get Egypt on side. Um, and the U.S. just can't do that. It's not competent enough to do that again.
Mm.
It can't co-opt a country of that size anymore. It doesn't have the ability. Um, it doesn't have the ability. But it because these people are so stupid, they don't understand why we once had the ability to do that and why we now no longer have the ability to do that. So I think that's and if you talk to Trump administration people about what's going on with Saudi and the new Sunni axis, like I don't even know if they're paying attention. Like I don't even know if they have even noticed that this is happening. Like I don't think a guy like Marco Rubio knows what Somaliland is really. Um,
That can't be so, can it? I mean, my instinct on this is, um, so having sort of come online politically when Bush was president, Bush Jr. was the president, and all
yeah.
of this sort of buffoonery and idiocy, everyone was saying our president is an idiot. He's such a stupid person, blah, blah, blah. Much later, I sort of concluded that that's not true. That was just a sort of act. They were just going to do whatever they wanted to do and didn't give a shit what anyone thought, and just whatever. They would just do whatever, and that's why it looked that way. But my worry is always that when we conclude, oh, these people are just stupid, that actually we're missing something. You have some sort of like Dunning-Kruger effect thing going on where it's like, no, you just don't quite understand. You don't see it. Um, and I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm overthinking this, but if a nation consists of groups, it isn't just one thing. Like the realists, they say, oh, the American national interest. Well, whose national interest in America? There are different groups in America with different interests, and the people making the decisions and pulling the triggers, and then the population. These are all different people with different interests. I think it would probably be better for most of the American people, most of the population, to have good amicable relations with other countries and good trade relations because we benefit from commerce and peace. But if you have a certain group of people behind the wheel, they might have a different sort of set of interests, and they might, their interests might be jeopardized severely in such a way that they do have incentives to act in a way which seems reckless to everyone else. Um, let's say you got a bunch of people in charge of a country who are deeply invested in a certain kind of, I don't know, energy or resources or whatever. From their perspective, if they can't rule the world, it's not worth living in. And so they're going to take big risks. And from everyone else's perspective, it looks stupid and foolish. But
Mhm.
but what explains it is the fact that, not everyone here has the same interests. I may just be overthinking this, but I can't help but worry that we're oversimplifying when we say stupid. I mean, Rubio has said things that indicate, like I've heard him basically express he understands MMT at the federal level. We don't
Mhm.
we don't have to tax in order to spend. I've heard him say, it might just be BS. Deep down, he's a neocon, but he says things that try to show that he's somehow different. So I worry about that. Maybe you don't buy it.
I mean, I think fundamentally there are people in the U.S. government, in the U.S. elite, who have who understand what they perceive to be America's geostrategic interests long term in a region like the Middle East, right? And
But
who
do you
develop.
actually think that they're talking about America's interest, or are they just concerned about their interest or their
Well,
donors'
I don't,
interest?
for the purposes of the point I'm trying to make, I don't think it really matters. Like, I think that they are perfectly happy to treat the donors' interests as their interests, right? Like, but there are people whose job it is to think about America's position in the Middle East 20 years from now from the perspective of controlling the oil, supporting Israel, whatever, whatever they want to do, right? And they have plans and they have contingencies, and they're the people who manage relationships with different governments and so on and so forth. Um, I think that what is happening now is not going according to plan for those people, right? I think that the 12-day war was not something that those people thought was a good idea. I don't think kidnapping Maduro is something that those people think is a good idea. I think that those people are not really steering the ship at this point. The people who are stealing the ship are less sophisticated. They're more from they're they're politicians who come out of a kind of um, interest group politics sort of formation, right? Like Rubio comes out of the Miami, Busano lobby, right? Tons of these guys. Netanyahu himself is basically like APAC is his political base. Like his support in Israel comes from the fact that he portrays himself as the one who works hand in glove with the lobby in the U.S. to manipulate American politics, right? Like, um, I think that all they think about is kind of the short term, how do we get this done politically element of it. And the people who think more long term about, like, okay, well, if we get this done politically now, what does that mean 20 years from now? I don't think they care anymore, either
Hmm.
because they're stupid or because, I could see Netanyahu, like, the guy is like, I'm going to prison if I don't get this war with Iran. So
Well,
I
that's
don't
what I
care,
mean. That's precisely what
Yeah.
I mean. So if you're
Yeah.
actually in that situation, it's not exactly stupid. I mean, okay, you have to have no morals, no regard for human life in general, all these bad things. But, suppose you are that guy in that situation, it is rational in order, if you don't want to stay out of jail, then what do I have to do to prevent that from happening? Keep wars perpetually going. You can see there's some rationale there at least. They're not just like it's not just a bull in a china shop, like people used to say about George Bush is just a flat-footed, ham-fisted fool. Um, they're doing something, and we're just going to suffer the consequences. But I mean, point taken, they aren't thinking long game anymore. They perhaps I don't know. Maybe in the Greenland NATO uh, area, this also we can see. I don't know. That was the next thing on the list. And the recent turn, I love this. The recent turn of Merz in Germany. Thoughts?
I mean, the Europeans have to see which way the wind is blowing at this point, but
You'd think, man, you would think, but I spent a lot of time there, and there's some effect of the American security umbrella in the post-war
mm,
period, and some effect of I don't know what it is. Like after the war, all the people who would have thought in a way that would be more like a sovereign country like America, Russia, or I don't know, China. They all just died. I don't know what. They just vanished. I don't know. But in Europe there is this bad effect of the security umbrella, I think, in the EU, where everyone is a sort of a like domesticated house pet who can't even comprehend the seriousness of international politics. They can't. They can't. They don't understand. They just think, be a vegetarian, get rid of the nuclear power, be nice. Yeah, we'll take all the refugees. Don't even ask where they're coming from. Don't even ask why there are Afghanistani and Syrian people in Germany. The reason why is because you're a vassal of an empire and they go break shit in the world and people flee to your country. Yeah, you have to take them because you're not sovereign. This is beyond comprehension. If you say Germany's not a sovereign country and you're German, the superego explodes and says, "You're a Nazi." Like these people don't have the capacity for thought, and it's like 60 years of conditioning, I think, in some cases. But that's what blows my mind recently. I mean, maybe we could talk about this first and then go to NATO and Greenland. Just a few days ago, Russia, I guess Putin said, like, look, the way we understand this conflict with Ukraine and uh, NATO and the EU ramping things up, sending troops, sending weapons, sending money, the CIA conducting these strikes in Russia. There was a drone strike apparently right near Vladimir Putin's residence. They said, look, this is basically like end serious for us. Like this is on our doorstep. It's that serious for us. If you don't fucking stop it, we're just going to nuke Germany and we're going to nuke the UK because this is serious. Just stop it. The next day, Merritt's comes out and says, all right, everybody, I think it's time we change direction. Russia is a European country. We have to find a better solution. We can do better. This is, we gotta come on, let's try and do it differently. And good for him. I mean, that is the correct move. I don't know if UK has the sense to do that, or they still think that they are enough of an empire that they could keep course or something like complete lunatics. But I mean, that's where things are at. That's where things are at. The tide is turning because Russia said, look, it is that serious, even though in the past they promised they would never be the first to use those weapons.
I mean, I think what's going on with the European ruling class is, if anything, less comprehensible to me than what's going on. Because I can understand decadence and kind of declining elite competence, in the U.S. Like I can understand how a numbskull like Marco Rubio becomes Secretary of State, sees a senile president, and it's like, okay, now's my chance to achieve the family dream of you know, overthrowing left-wing governments in Latin America using American military force, and not thinking about the long-term consequences or not caring about the long-term consequences, or just being deluded and thinking that everything will work out. I can see that, but I just don't get how an entire continent of people, of political elites, I should say, can just be so bumbling and ineffectual when it comes to looking out for their own not long-term national interest. For a while, I thought I think it's notable that both Macron and Merz are finance guys. Um, I think this is part of the puzzle that the older generation of European heads of state and elites weren't quite as immersed in sort of American elite institutions as the new generation are. Um, Starmer is obvious. I think Starmer is directly compromised by the Israel lobby. So I think maybe that's another element of control. Um, but no, I really don't get it. It's a mystery to me. I mean, I'm a little bit stumped as to how they can just not understand which way things are obviously going.
Yeah, I mean, this is a case where I am inclined more so to think that it is just stupidity, and it rings, it sort of rhymes or resonates like the idea you have like I don't know, the umpteenth child of some king who founded a kingdom. But the nobles, the aristocrats, they're all inbred. Like they're so convinced that they're so awesome. And it's just like this sort of narcissistic doom loop of regurgitated, Ouroboros eating itself, that you basically just have a ruling group of people who are too stupid to hold the wheel, it seems. But I mean, will anyone else sort of be able to do it? I don't know. I mean, it seems like that's really changing, and I wonder about so Russia said Germany and UK. I guess they seem to be the main powers pushing the conflict to continue. They notably didn't mention France, and France, curiously, is sending troops to Greenland to, I don't know, protect Denmark from the United States. I mean, this is shaping up to be a very interesting little kerfuffle, it seems like, with Greenland.
Right. Well, I mean, if you look at the order in which you would expect European countries to defect from the American security umbrella. Um, it, the last two would be Germany, UK, I think. France is obviously going to defect before those two, almost irrespective of who's in charge of the country. And Macron is probably the most pro-American president France will ever have. But by the standards of contemporary European leaders, he uh, is at least rhetorically willing to kind of say things to the effect that Europe really needs to divorce itself a little bit from American interests and start looking out for its own interests. Um, so yeah, it's not surprising that if you're trying to play divide and rule, if you're Russia trying to divide and rule the EU, um, confine yourself to Germany and the UK and maybe some of the Baltics, like some of the more rabid, pro NATO countries. But the countries that are kind of, you know, like France, Italy, Spain, Greece, just kind of leave them alone, and hope that a couple of them will back you up when push comes to shove.
Well, I wonder if this could really crack EU and NATO apart, but also the Greenland stuff. And I suspect that Denmark would ultimately just say, fine, fuck it, take it, asshole. But I mean, they might actually take that loss in order to keep the EU and NATO. But at that point, isn't it de facto over? I just wonder
Yeah.
whether this is the end of it. And then, I've always heard that like evil people whom I disagree with on value questions, but intelligent people have, old school imperialists. I think it was like what Mackinder, but also Brzezinski more recently. They're saying things like, above all, what the WASP, the Anglo ruling class in Britain and America, what you have to prevent is the Russian, European, so the Eurasian landmass from becoming one continuous military industrial bloc. If Russia is continuous with Europe, if it's united in a single bloc, that will be invincible and at all costs. I mean, it's like the Soviet Sino split kind of thinking.
Mm,
Um,
yeah.
you have to prevent that from happening. But if this goes down, if the EU and NATO effectively crumble and the American imperialists retreat to the Western Hemisphere, where they think that their law rules over everyone there, sort of that's the Dunroe Doctrine or whatever, then that might actually happen.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, China's been trying to facilitate Eurasian integration. That's one of the big priorities of the Belt and Road Initiative, right? Like everyone understands that, or everyone outside of the US EU elite understands that this is kind of the end game. Um, the US, insofar as the current American elite understands that this is even at play, are kind of torn between fine, let it happen. We'll just take our toys and stay in the Western Hemisphere, and we'll be a little regional hegemon, but not a global hegemon anymore. Um, and just like total delusion, like, oh, we're always going to be on top. Like China will never, we'll just sabotage China's efforts to unite all these countries, and everything will be fine. Um, the Europeans, yeah, it does seem like no one is really going where they need to be going, which is we need to reorient towards either Russia or China, right? And a lot of the Eastern Europeans are going to hate the idea of reorienting towards Russia, but for the Western Europeans, I mean, Russia makes more sense than China because it's the weaker power. It's geographically closer, like it's um, Europe is more valuable as an ally to Russia than it is to China, right? Like China's busy building. China's goal is to facilitate the economic development of the third world so that they can start buying Chinese products, right? Um, I don't think China is really obsessed with having Europe on side. Whereas for Russia, it would be great to have Europe on side. Like that's your next door power block. You want them to be friendly.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and I don't know what it would take for the Europeans to understand their own interest there, because if you can't get it, if you can't see it, like for instance, there's this book Wolfgang Munchau wrote a book called Kaput, and it's about Germany being over, like the German model is done. And he says, well, Germany came to rely on American defense, and it came to rely on on export markets to China, and it came to rely on cheap Russian gas production materials. And this is the weakness of Germany, and that's why we're so screwed. It's like, no, no, that's perfectly rational. You take the lowest production cost, you find the market, and you get someone else to pay for your defense. That's totally rational. Um, you need to have good diplomatic relations with other countries. You can't just, do whatever you want. I mean, what else were they supposed to do? Um, what it seems to me is that there's some real problem with the European intellectuals and power politicians. They can't think like normal nations, grown-up adults, not minors, but adults. Like when you come of age, you get your reason and you can think about serious things in a serious way. But all they can do is talk about their values and how they have to, their commitment to their values and blah blah blah. And it's gonna wreck the whole thing. So, I mean, the only parties that can come forward and say, that's nuts. That vision has no future. We have to figure out a way to make sense how to get on with Russia. You can't just dismiss these people. You need heating. It gets cold. You got to build stuff, right? Um, the only people who are actually saying that, like that talking point has been left to the extreme right. The extreme right. And my hope is now, sorry, after a bunch of dark thoughts, maybe a little silver lining, if Merz turns, if the German leadership is actually coming to its senses and they say things like, you know what, actually, we have to pull back from the edge with Russia. We can't do this. Maybe that will sort of deflate some of the pressure that was going to the right because they were the only ones saying, we have a national interest. Stop this nonsense. Stop this war.
I think the European centrist parties um, are so kind of their grip is kind of much more tenuous than they believe it is, right? And at any moment in one of these countries, you could have a major electoral breakthrough for the far right, or in a couple of these countries, you could conceive of a breakthrough for the far left, right? Like it's not outside the realm of possibility that Mélenchon wins the next French presidential election, for example. Um, when the dam breaks in one of the major countries. And the problem is that it already happened in Italy, but they didn't really do anything. Like Meloni is just such an ineffectual. Who knows what her angle even is at this point. Um, that maybe the dam will break in Germany. AfD comes to power, and then they just kind of go on autopilot and pursue the same policy after all, because that's what the far right the far right loves being anti-establishment until it actually wins, and then it's like, oh, now finally we can be the establishment. Like let's just act like the establishment. Um, so I really don't know. It's outside of my powers of comprehension to figure out what the hell is going on in Europe, but it just seems like it can't last. It can't last too much longer. Like the things are getting so obvious. Um, that the Ukraine war is a disaster, that the US is out of control and incompetent, that, you know, really you should just start talking to Russia and China and act like real countries again. But Mearsheimer would say that the real reason the Europeans are desperate for the American security umbrella is that it keeps them from fighting each other. Um,
Yeah, they have a coordination problem. That much is clear. And so American presence could keep, I mean, that might be right. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I mean, it's possible. I think France thinks that the reason France has always been the least pro-American of the major European countries is that it thinks it will be the natural leader of Europe in the absence of sort of American domination, right? Obviously, Germany is bigger and wealthier and probably would actually be the natural leader of Europe. And so if that sort of
You can't say that. But all right.
Right. If that actually occurred, I mean, I could see the French and Germans going back at it, and
Well, in the absence of America, France would be the natural leader. In the absence, okay, we should say Russia first, but then America maybe second. I don't know. In the absence of those, Germany would be the Central European leader.
yeah,
And
yeah,
yeah, I mean, yeah. So I mean, I could see there's a case to be made there, but I mean, there's also a bit blinded by this sort of national pride and chauvinism. At any rate, it does seem right to say there's a coordination problem, but the idea that they would just start a war if America weren't there, I think
right, right.
that seems a bit like sort of, that seems a
It's a
bit,
bit hysterical. Yeah,
well, do they, I mean, they don't have, Mearsheimer also says like they don't even have the military means to fight anyone. How could they fight each
right,
other at this
right,
point?
right. Well, and say what you will about the EU and integration and so forth, but I think the it would take generations to develop the popular will for intra-European war again. Like I think the average French person, the average German person would be going, their country's going to war is like just inconceivable at this point.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and maybe in 100 years that would change, but it's not going to change before that, I think.
Yeah, they don't have the capacity and they're too soft after the past 60 years of whatever has been dished out to them. But now Greenland and NATO, what do we think is going on with that?
I think that's the Trump administration. This is the opposite of what's going on in Venezuela, right? Where Venezuela is different elements of the administration and the deep state lobbying him to do to do this crazy policy. I think this is the other way around. I think this is like Trump just is a senile old idiot who has a fixation on Greenland for whatever reason, views it as his opportunity to maybe, noticeably expand the borders of the country, and he'll be in the history books and so on and so forth, like the Louisiana Purchase or something. And
Right.
he just wants to do this. And everyone around him understands it's a crazy idea, but can't tell him that because the entire administration is like it's run on such a personal access model that everyone's terrified of displeasing Trump because then he'll stop talking to them and then they're totally cut off from policymaking, right? So everyone just kind of
Mm.
smiles and nods and goes along with it. And it's just going to keep going until it until either he
Yeah.
loses interest or until something really
The house
really
is on
insane
fire.
happens. Yeah,
Right. Right.
right.
Well, that's what I keep thinking. Like, if they would have invaded Venezuela, that would have been really falling on their own sword. And they maybe know that. But the question is just how much crazy shit can he do before he falls on his own sword, it seems like. And people have said, I've heard like rare earth minerals, positioning for, I don't know, World War III vis-a-vis Russia and China, like some recalibration strategy, like the unipolar moment is over, but it's not just going to be multipolarity because the ruling class of this country can't control itself. Um, it has to be. We need that for security because Denmark can't keep it safe from Russia and China, and it's some kind of like launching pad. I don't know. This is what I've heard. You think it's just all ridiculous?
I think all that stuff it makes no sense, right? Like Denmark's in NATO. The U.S. can have bases in Greenland at will. If anyone attacks Greenland, the U.S. can use, NATO as an excuse to intervene. Like, if the U.S. wants access to Greenland, it is perfectly capable of just sort of getting whatever it wants from Denmark. Just like that, the U.S. comes to Denmark is like, hey, you need to give mining rights to some American company for these rare earth minerals. Like, yeah, of course the US is going to get its way. The US gets its way all the time on that kind of stuff, within the EU NATO. So I don't think that makes sense. I think that, and then you look at geostrategically, like, does US actual possession of Greenland, um, at the expense of possibly destroying NATO, actually help the U.S. defend itself better against Russia and China in the future, as opposed to the current situation where U.S. has de facto access to Greenland whenever it wants because both are in NATO. Like it just doesn't make any sense, as kind of a long term geostrategic power play. So I think it's much more likely that this is just a senile fixation of Trump's.
So you think basically, so he wants to be like those, like who did the Louisiana Purchase? Who was the
I think
president?
It was Jefferson.
Yeah, he wants to be like that legendary. type who acquired all of this land to get his face on Mount Rushmore.
Right, right, right.
So
No,
that's it.
that's just my strongest feeling about what's going on here. I don't think there's a significant number of foreign policy experts in the American elite who honestly think that this is a great idea for American long term geostrategic interests.
Well, in the vein of sort of the fail son inheritors of the empire are wrecking it, and everyone's just along for the ride. It comes to mind that Napoleon, famous line from Napoleon, never interrupt your opponent when he's making a mistake. Who knows? But okay, so now do we still have time to shift to the domestic situation? We've got ICE and the Fed. So we looked at the other stuff outside, the shitstorm outside. Now there's the shitstorm inside. What do you think?
Well, what I'm interested in is the um, developments around the Fed. Uh, Trump just launched an investigation into Jerome Powell, accusing him of um, misappropriating funds for buildings, and so it's kind of clear that Trump has it out for Jerome Powell because Jerome Powell has raised interest rates and then been slow to lower them. And Trump has been very adamant that we need to lower the interest rate to prevent a recession, boost the economy, blah blah blah. Jerome Powell sort of in a forced political moment has gone on the record saying, we deny all these allegations. This is clearly a politically motivated attack on me. But this is a very interesting conflict um, domestically about interest rates and uh, how to manage a fragile economy in the Trump administration.
Right. So I heard that Jerome Powell's being accused of having installing some countertops that are a little too nice, right? Some nice marble
Right, right,
countertops.
right.
And the idea is, where'd you get that money from, Jerome? I mean, those are the kinds of allegations.
Yeah, it's like the charges are clearly ludicrous. Everyone
But
knows that. Yeah.
but I mean, so for instance, I mean, Mike Bolton sitting in a jail cell, I have to admit, I'm not going to interrupt that,
No, 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 absolutely. No, I think it's funny. I think it's great. I mean, I love that the Trump administration keeps trying to do this lawfare stuff against its domestic political enemies, and then turns out it doesn't really work out. And except for the ones who like Bolton, actually they could get him on something, so they did it to him, right? But they're not going to be able to get Powell on anything. But the funny thing is that, to my knowledge, Powell's term is up in a couple months anyway. So they could have just waited and not reappointed him, and that would have
Well, they're
been
making an example of him. I think it's
right.
intimidation to make an example. But, looming in the background, getting rid of the so-called independence of the Federal
Yeah,
Reserve. I mean, independent from what? Independent from the
right,
people. It's run for the
right.
creditors against the population. So, I mean, if Trump wants to get rid of the independence of the Fed or abolish the Fed, I mean, I'm not going to disagree with him on that, right? Because, like,
Yeah,
that's exactly what the
absolutely.
the right line would be from a very different perspective.
Hmm.
But
I think we have to really consider Trump promised a reindustrialization and a renaissance of manufacturing, and his opponents on the left, and his opponents everywhere, I suppose, have been skeptical of that. Um, uh, in a second, his rolling out of tariffs, um, you know, the whole chaos of that, of that policy. Um, Also, his insistence on lowering interest rates. With the tariffs, I think the critique was there's not one specific thing you can do to just revive in manufacturing, right? It has to be a whole slew of policy changes, and I have to say, from what I'm seeing, it really does seem like Trump is. pushing for the whole package of industrial manufacturing policy, which includes tariffs. It includes lowering interest rates to encourage investment. It includes tax breaks for manufacturing investment. I mean, uh, I think there's a real conversation to be had here of what will it take for the American economy to pivot from this financialized, strong dollar model
Mhm.
to the meaningful industrial activity.
Yeah, well, one thing it would take indeed is breaking the stranglehold that the creditors and non-industrial financial capital has over the country, which is, running things in this sort of deflationary, austere way is great for creditors, but it sucks for everyone else and it puts pressure on production. It raises the cost of living so high that the wages you would have to pay to produce anything are so high that it's hard to make a profit. And that's what incentivizes people to offshore their capital, take their capital elsewhere. And then that just sort of furthers the downward spiral of financialization and deflation. And so, indeed, all those things, but moreover, the cost of living would have to fall and the creditor stranglehold would have to be broken. Now, that's all great. I mean, that's the kind of thing that the CCP would do. But and I'm not declaring allegiance to them. I'm just saying anyone with a pro-population policy would do that. If you give a shit about the majority of people, that's what you do. But the problem is going to be one where the interests, it'll come up against its own interests. I mean, Trump is a real estate developer. He, at some point, like, it's not like he doesn't have a position in this situation. Um, the ruling class wants to save its country that's failing until it realizes that it's part of the problem. And then it thinks, oh, on second thought, let's just double down, right? So, I mean, yeah, let's get rid of the creditors. Yeah, let's do land reform. I mean, that's the checklist, that's the wish list. But I mean, they're not actually going to be able to do it because they're the ones standing in the way. They are the the rock tied around the neck of the country, and they'd have to get rid of themselves in order to have an industrial boom. Trump doesn't own factories. Trump doesn't develop factories. He develops real estate. That means buy low and sell high. I mean, granted, there's some production involved because but still, it's not like he's not a manufacturer. So when I hear these statements that they make, I think, yeah, that'd be great if you could do it, but you can't do it because you're the one standing in the way. Not even the most egregious case of it, but like one of them.
Well, this is why I'm so confused about this fight around the Federal Reserve, because uh, as far as I know, the wealth of the American economic elite relies on the dominance of the dollar, the strength of
Hmm.
the dollar.
Hmm.
Uh, a strong dollar relies on the Fed's ability to minimize inflation, which is why they love jacking up the interest rates. So why is Trump and whoever in his administration that's in line with him on this, why are they so dead set on taking over the Federal Reserve and pursue pursuing a policy that would weaken the dollar? Isn't that directly against their own class interests?
Well, we need to disambiguate this term strong dollar, weak dollar, because it sounds good, right? Strong dollar. Yeah, yeah. It's like do you want a strong bulletproof vest or do you want a weak bulletproof vest? I'll take a strong one, thanks. I'll take two. But and that's kind of how it sounds, but a strong dollar, what is that? A dollar with a high value that can buy a lot of stuff. That's good for creditors. But if you're a manufacturer, you don't want a strong dollar. You want a weak dollar because you want it to be advantageous for buyers so that they come to you and buy your stuff, right? So what a weak dollar, that sounds like undesirable. But if you're a manufacturer, that's what you would want. And if you work for manufacturers, that's what you would want. You're going to have employment. They're going to produce stuff. Um, and so a weak dollar would be good so we have to disaggregate the ruling class into class fractions. There's the rentier financier landlord one, which Trump has a foot in, which is what makes this sort of complicated, it seems. And then there's the sort of industrial commercial one. I mean, granted, it's oligopolies and monopolies, maybe not that competitive, but um, you want a weak dollar if you want to reindustrialize and make stuff and sell it because that's nobody's going to buy stuff if the prices are high or higher than what they could get elsewhere, right? So that's not good for industry, and it's not good for people who work for industry. I mean, that all checks out. That all makes sense. Um, the other thing to think about is just, I mean, imagine you don't have a layer of bureaucracy between your policy goals, sovereign policy, like you plot a course, where do we want to end up? That's the end. What are the means? How do we get there? But then you got this layer of bureaucracy who says, actually, we're going to tinker with interest rates in order to make things advantageous for the creditor class, the financial class. Actually, no, actually, you're not going to do that. Stop it. You're fucking everything up for your own little sectional advantage. I mean, it makes perfect sense, right? That's why, banking is public utility in China. Like, don't give people that control. Don't let them do it because you won't be a sovereign nation if you do that. They'll have you buy the stuff. You know what I mean? So that all makes total sense. The only thing that perplexes me is that he himself is a kind of, rent collector.
I mean, so I think there could be a couple of reasons for this push. One is a straightforward class analysis, which says that the fraction of economic elites that rely on manufacturing and investment are causing this push for an industrial policy, and that could be part of it. Another explanation could be the uh, political class just sort of, you know, uh, taking stock of what's going on internationally, geopolitically, and seeing their rivals develop very quickly, and just making the calculation that we have to do something here. We have to do something to shore up our industrial economy, because if we don't, they will eat our lunch. And so it could be some sort of coordinated um, foreign policy at play, and it could be. I think it could be both. I think it could be, some level of both of those. Um,
But they would have to really crack some skulls to do this. Like if you really want to reindustrialize, I mean, you don't need to be out there kicking the shit out of people on the streets of Minneapolis. What you need to do is call all the top oligarchs into a room and say, like Putin style, listen, put your phone down, listen. You play ball or you're done. Like that's what it would take, CCP style. And I just don't see that happening. Because they're his friends. Like, I saw some, what was it, Due Dissidents, I think. Recently, I saw, there's some big meeting in the White House and Tucker Carlson is there and they're talking about oil in Venezuela with like Halliburton people. And it's like, about bonds being advantageous. And I heard Tucker talk about this, and he's like the black sheep. He's outsider. Trump says fuck Tucker. He's abandoning his base. Uh, Wait a minute, what? And he's still at this. They're all chumming it up together. They're all buds. I mean, that's going to be the problem. The limit of any administration's ability to do what it actually takes to bring and I'm not talking about socialism. I'm talking about capitalism to bring this dying corpse back to life or bring it back online. I mean, the limit to that is going to be their readiness to sacrifice their friends because it's these monopolistic, oligopolistic oligarchs who are just like asphyxiating this poor, beaten animal like a beast of burden. They're just killing it. Like, yeah. So I don't see it happening because what it would actually take is pretty ruthless sacrifice. It's
yeah,
a lot. It's a lot of
we
romantic imagery and talk. I don't know. And
uh,
personal grudges. Like with Jerome Powell, that seems like a personal grudge.
sure.
Or maybe you have
We
something more
recently
substantive in mind.
well, we recently had a talk with Vijay Prashad and Michael Hudson on a study that Prashad's Tricontinental Institute um, published on hyperimperialism. I want to read a short paragraph, and this is not a unique argument to them. But I think it's at least illustrates maybe some of what we're seeing. The study says under neoliberalism, the relative autonomy of the US state eroded and private capital exerted more direct control of much of the state. Today, however, faced with rising international economic threats to the US position, the failure of neoliberalism to maintain US economic dominance, the collective political interests of the ruling class are being asserted by increasingly autonomous state, as opposed to representing the interests of individual capitalist groups. To borrow from Lenin, for the capitalists, also, politics must take precedence over economics. End quote. I think there's a case to be made that something like that is going on, and that would explain the rising authoritarian, nature of the state. And this isn't just Trump. This was Biden before him. Um, so we're seeing some. I mean, this could be an explanation. Why are we seeing this rise of authoritarianism in U.S. politics? Could it be um, the an effort in the political class to take hold of economic policy, to wrest control from the economic class for their own sake, for their own economic interests? I think that's a powerful explanation, and I think it would certainly explain a lot of what we've seen in the Trump administration that we, have been characterized, could easily be characterized as socialist. Trump's insistence that the U.S. buy shares of, what was it, Intel, in order to save them. This is really just economic planning. This is
Hmm.
really just policy. Whether they can do it well, whether they can do it effectively, is another story. But that could be one way to characterize what we're seeing in the Trump administration. It's increasing authoritarianism and attempt to take hold of economic policy, specifically to wrest control, as you say, from the creditor class.
Yeah, I think this is classic. I mean, there are all kinds of examples of this. The chapter on the working day in Capital Volume One, Marx says like you basically have a prisoner's dilemma situation where each individual capitalist just does what's maximally advantageous from an individual perspective, but when you aggregate it up, it's a situation again, killing the golden goose. Like if you overexploit the working class, you'll just beyond a certain point, they need rest, they need nutrition. Beyond a certain point, you can't cut wages, you're just going to kill it, and then you're going to spoil your party, your own party, all by yourself. And so someone has to step in and say, listen up, numbskulls, enough. And this is for your own good, right? If you love the children, you have to give them medicine sometimes, even when they don't want it. And that means applying force. This is classic. I mean, not only, from Marx, but I mean, right-wing politicians who have been successful themselves. Look at Disraeli says health is everything, or Otto von Bismarck. He introduced the socialist policies, Social Security. He's like, look, we have to do this. You can't you can't just exploit everything to the hilt. You'll destroy it. Like this, this has to be mitigated. You can't just do whatever you want. So that could be it. But the question is just like, how committed is he? Can he really make the kids take the medicine? Because it doesn't taste good and they're his friends and they're going to say, come on, Donald. And if he really jams it down their throat hard enough, then they're going to gang up on him, right? Because, I mean, that nobody wants to do that. Like they don't want to do what's in their own interest, even as capitalists. I mean, many of them are coming together, and I think you're right to say, like, for recent times, there's a growing awareness that this is the case. I think Wolfgang Streeck says this too. How will capitalism end? He says that capitalism needs what looks like its opponents, like labor unions. It needs all these organizations. It needs all these limitations. He says it's dependent on some external limit because it can't limit itself. And so when it gets rid of all of its external limitations and opponents, it seems victorious, but the victory is Pyrrhic because it's like it dies on an overdose of itself. It sort of drowns in its own secretions. It just can't, it's not good. It's just going to implode. So I think that could very well be happening. I just wonder whether he can bring himself to one, whether he'll know, whether his class instinct and position will blind him from being able to know what it is that needs to be done. And second is like the determination to do what it takes, because it's basically you'd have to do something like the CCP, like for the sake of the nation, we have to direct economic policy in a way which we pick some losers in order to save the thing, and the losers are going to be very powerful and they're going to fight back. I mean, I wouldn't stand in the way of that, but I don't know.
No, Trump just doesn't have the brain power to do something like that. Like he's just not that kind of guy, right? There might be people in his administration who are seriously committed to some kind of um, industrial policy or whatever, right? But at the end of the day, they don't call the shots, and they don't have the political base independent of Trump to be anywhere near power. Um, as soon as Trump is off the stage, these guys are not, you know.
Well, they got their own agenda. I mean, my thought with him is he doesn't have the determination, like the focus, like laser focus, this one thing. Don't permit yourself to be, diverted.
He's a moron. The guy's an idiot. That's it. Like he's just we're dealing with a below average intelligence person.
Well, he changes course like I don't know 3 times a week it seems.
Yeah. He's a senile old man. He was always a little bit scattered, but now it's really bad because he's old and losing it. And he's just operating purely on he's just on vibes. Like whatever makes him feel good in the moment. Whoever he last talked to, whoever said the right thing, yeah, I'll do it. And then he changed his mind and then changed his mind back. Like it's just the people who thought that this was going to be like the vehicle by which we might actually, the people on the right, I want to say, like the kind of dissident right wingers who are like, this is how we're going to bring back manufacturing, we're going to do all this stuff. They totally they were deluding themselves about who they were working under. Now what happens when he's gone? These people presumably will still believe that it would be nice to bring back manufacturing. Obviously plenty of people on the left believe that too. When are people going to start talking to each other and actually making a more durable political movement, with the long-term goal of achieving these goals? I don't really know. But the Trump attempt failed, and will continue to fail because it just doesn't have the hardware.
All right. What about the stuff with the 3-letter name thing?
ICE.
Yeah. What do you make of this? I mean, it just seems insane.
This is the Stephen Miller subplot of the administration, where the you've got an actual fascist, like not, and I'm not the kind of person who's called Trump a fascist because I don't think he necessarily is, but I think Stephen Miller is an actual fascist in terms of his actual political beliefs. He's in charge of the of a very important part of the internal security apparatus. He's also incompetent, thankfully, and it's just things are blowing up. Like there's no discipline, there's no control. They're running roughshod over people. They're causing problems. Like, you know, uh, yeah, this is yeah. Go ahead.
When you say he's incompetent, are you basing that off of certain decisions that he's made, or just the manner in which we've seen these raids and attacks executed?
I think anyone who knows how security forces work, knows that hiring a bunch of people off the street, kind of giving them vague instructions to go out and arrest illegals with like, no, someone's gonna get shot in the face.
Yeah.
And turns out someone got shot in the face. And now it's not fun games anymore for the people who the elements of Trump's political base, who kind of wanted the cathartic, oh yeah, arrest them, deport them, right? Like that kind of stuff isn't really, it doesn't seem fun anymore to them.
They thought it was going to be like the movies, I don't know if you've
Right.
seen this Join ICE ad. It's like a Marlboro commercial.
Right,
It's like
right.
it's like green and black instead of black and white, or like kind of weird green and black. And then there's a cowboy in front of a mountain range, and then just a black stealth bomber flying over. Very
Right.
ominous, and it says, "It'll be our country again. Join ICE."
Right,
And
right,
I think
right.
you got all these like underemployed uh, people who fantasize about being in these movies that they watch and want to be a cowboy, And this, basically they'll hire anyone. I looked at this.
Yeah,
It's pretty easy to get hired. You get a $50,000 sign-on bonus, a decent salary. If you're the kind of person who likes the idea of walking around with a gun, you get
right,
that.
right,
And only 37 days of training. Like
right. It's insane.
this is going
It's
to happen. Problems are going to happen when you do that. But
right.
I mean, but it makes me wonder. It raises other questions. And similarly, like you said, when people like what was his name, Jason Stanley, started screaming about fascism, I sort of rolled my eyes because I thought, oh, you squishy libs, you know, you only started to care when the empire sort of boomeranged back and you started to feel it. Um, But when I see this ICE stuff and these bands, these guys, it's like it does kind of remind me of the Freikorps in Germany, these paramilitary ex-soldier militias. In Germany, it was people from World War I who were traumatized and had no prospects. They'd join these sort of vigilante gangs, basically going around and terrorizing people. And then, of course, these were all funneled into the fascist groups. I mean, they had grievances, right? There were problems, but then, this was sort of assembled and directed and exploited. And it seems like you could make the case that that's what this is. It's sort of like lump in downwardly mobile, petty bourgeoisie, maybe downwardly mobile working class, or maybe just straight up lump in people, just making these bands of like angry numbskulls who don't know what they're doing and actually are going to get put in a situation where they panic, or they're so traumatized that the adrenaline gets going and you can't be around that person without getting hurt.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of to a certain extent, this is a jobs program for Trump's quote unquote base, right? Like the hardcore of the base, the disaffected young men. Like, yeah, this is you.
It's a patronage network.
It's a patronage network, and you listen to guys like I don't know if you know these two the Good Old Boys podcasters. They're these kind of like
Never heard it.
Trump tard right wing podcasters, but they're obsessed with the idea that the Democrats have all these patronage networks for their base. They've got the NGOs, they've got state government workers, they've got all this stuff. We need one for our base, for our guys, right? And so I think that at a fundamental level that's what's going on here. And this is being run out of Stephen Miller's wing of the administration, whoever, I don't know who really is aligned with him or what, but he seems to have a lot of latitude. And they're doing a little jobs program for their boys. And turns out that it's kind of backfiring on them politically because um, I'm sure the couple I don't know how many thousands of people they've hired, but I'm sure the people the cowboys they hired love having these jobs, but for the rest of the country, everyone's kind of like, this is kind of getting weird, like this is getting a little bit out of hand. And I'm not just saying like the left liberal part of the country. I think a lot of the rest of Trump's base, the Trump base that isn't necessarily just disaffected young men, is kind of not really on board with this anymore.
Really?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I think
So
that
people are turning?
I think that you look at the polling, it's, and this happens every time, but like immigration's popular again, like, I don't think that the median Trump voting, boomer is really convinced that that woman needed to be shot in the face, like
Well, I've
I,
heard a
I
lot of people say like she should have listened. It's just mind-boggling shit like that.
yeah, I mean, you've always got your bootlickers on in a right wing political movement, but I don't think. Just my impression is that that's not really the prevailing view. And he was already losing these people with the tariff stuff. I think that, and then the Epstein stuff. Like, I think stuff is accumulating, and his base isn't really as solid as it used to be before. I think they've done a lot of damage to the loyalty that the base felt towards him in a very short amount of time.
Well, when you start killing citizens, then you have to start doing, I mean, because that's what it was. I mean, she wasn't a foreigner, she
Yeah.
was a citizen. You can disagree with her about political stuff. That's all fine. Probably probably given that that's the case, but like just killing on the street like that, I mean, that's nuts. And the bottom line is that that guy he will have immunity because he can be pardoned because the position in the government which that agency is in, the executive can pardon. I mean, it's not looking good.
But I think Minnesota could charge him under state law for murder, and they couldn't pardon him for that. So I think
Really
I think his legal jeopardy is pretty significant. Um,
interesting.
I mean, it would be a hot button trial for sure. I mean, yeah, I if this was part of some brilliant plan, to kind of heighten tension and then use that as a pretext to use the security forces to impose martial law or whatever, right? Like, I don't think they're really playing their hand very well at all.
Hmm.
I think now the further they push stuff, it's not like they're solidifying their base. I think that they're eroding their base when they push stuff in this direction. Um, and they're gonna lose the midterms, and that would be the sink or swim moment, right? If you were gonna do it, it would be either right before the midterms or it would be right after the midterms, claiming that the midterms were fiddled with or whatever, right? And you need to have laid the groundwork for your base to fall in line when you claim that there's left wing disorder in the streets and we need to use ICE or whatever to impose control. And this kind of stuff is not helping long term, that sort of end game.
So it's just going to crumble under its own weight, you think?
I I think so. My guess is that they I'm sure there were kind of under the radar conversations, guys like Stephen Miller, people planning for what are we going to do when quote unquote the Democrats steal the midterms, whatever. Like, I'm sure that this kind of stuff was happening, but I think what's most likely to happen is that the Dems win the midterms and then Congress just starts to shut this shit down, you know?
Hmm. Well, I mean, they won't. I mean, I wonder because they're pretty paralyzed, pretty controlled, and they wouldn't restrict Trump's action on Venezuela, and they usually go along. So I wonder how that'll go. But I mean, I also wonder like what's the situation in LA? What's the situation in Minneapolis? And what's up with all the Somalians? Everyone's talking about all the Somalian stuff.
I think the right wing realized that Mexicans and Latin Americans are not like frightening enough to keep their base agitated anymore, and so they needed to find a new kind of immigrant population to kind of fearmonger about. But I mean, it doesn't really seem to have worked. Like the Somali population kind of had a just a phenomenal couple weeks on Twitter, like a month or so ago, where they were just absolutely winning the battle for ideas, I guess you could say, with their memes and shit. I think
For
that
the
kind
hearts and
of
minds.
for the hearts and minds of the denizens of the internet. I mean, I think the Somalis won that particular meme war pretty handily, and it doesn't really seem like it's going anywhere. Now you've even got kind of um, somehow you've managed to make it so that people like Tucker are saying that like when the deep state still is trying to fearmonger against Muslims, it's because of the Israeli agenda. Like this kind of stuff is backfiring to that extent that now sort of right wing commentators are suddenly denouncing Islamophobia.
Hmm.
I don't think it's really working the way that they thought it was going to work.
That's right. If someone like Tucker is saying that actually hating Muslims is the Israel lobby having taken over the country, that is kind of a big turn. But I do remember it was like not that long ago actually. I saw so I don't know who this person is, Isabella Maria De Luca on Instagram saying, "Well, actually, maybe Mexicans are okay. We should just think about it. They make good food." I
Isabella Maria De Luca, yeah, I'm sure that she thinks Mexicans are okay.
She said, yeah. She said, she said they're either Christians or Catholics, so they're close to us. Like, huh? Had to listen to that twice. You know, I guess there's a kind of evangelical Christian who thinks the Catholics aren't Christians or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, that does seem to be a change. But then nevertheless, Tucker and all these people, I did see that they're criticizing pretty heavily the what's her name, Ilhan Omar, and all the. I don't know. I'm not so sure if it's settled.
I mean, they're always engaged in this sort of triangulation effort. Like you can't. It's difficult in a right wing political milieu to come out in favor of the out group, right? You have to kind of like do it by steps, right? Like you have to find some way to triangulate people into the end group, and it's useful to leave some of them and still in the out group so you can continue to divide them that way, right? And I think I'm sure that Ilhan Omar will continue to be a right wing boogeyman for ages, right? But I think really part of this is that you know Stephen Miller's wing, what Stephen Miller is up to, is aimed at the right wing internet part of the Trump coalition, right? Like the disaffected young men, like that's who they're targeting, et cetera, et cetera. And these guys have, these guys are not really all that agitated about Latin Americans and Muslims anymore. Like they're kind of more interested in the Jew part of things, and that's not really convenient for the administration for obvious reasons. And their efforts to kind of reorient things towards Latin American crime gangs, Venezuela smuggling fentanyl, Somali terrorism or Somali welfare fraud or whatever.
Why don't you
Um,
guys hate brown people for a change?
Right. It doesn't seem to be getting much traction in the right wing, ecosystem. Like more stuff is like Alex Jones just went after Candace Owens really hard, and all of his commenters are like, Alex, you sold out, like, you're controlled by the Israel lobby, like Candace gives us the truth, like et cetera, et cetera. Like this, the trajectory is pretty clear that this is the direction that the right wing netroots is going, and yeah, they haven't figured out how to short circuit that process yet.
Yeah, they're trying to control the opposition, but it looks like it's getting bumpy and coming apart, and it's getting harder and harder to corral these people in the direction they want to go. I guess just maybe with an eye to time, maybe we should wrap it up, and I'll say something like my final thought. In these cases where it looks like things might fragment and there might be some kind of, fracture, potentially realignment, I think I might be wrong about this, but it seems like more likely that the dividing lines will be those of material position, investment, interest, and that these things aren't really decided by ideas and belief commitments and principles and values. If we want to understand the camps, how they're aligned, how they might come apart, how they might regroup differently, we'd have to understand the positions of these people. I don't know, like we'll never see the balance sheet maybe, but we'd have to see what real physical and financial interests the groups have. And that would go a long way to explaining these fights, infighting, and also the attempts to control the opposition. So sort of a warning against wishful thinking when it comes to um, thinking about fractures and realignments. For example, I mean, I'll just say it. Tucker Carlson, when he talks, sometimes he sounds like more of a Marxist than anyone on the left. But I always have this sense in the back of my mind, sort of looming, like, yeah, but at the end of the day, the dude is literally an old guard WASP oligarch. And maybe, he might have an interest in saving the country that's going down precisely because of his investment. But those literal investments in positions, those will ultimately determine the positions. And so, sometimes some rhetoric gets used to keep people in line, but at the end of the day, I mean, you can't succumb to wishful thinking.
I mean, with a guy like Tucker, this is the wing of the capitalist class that still actually understands its own class interests, and that's why they sound like Marxists, right?
Right,
Because
right.
if you understand how to do class analysis, you wind up sounding at least somewhat like a Marxist because no one else is doing it these days, right? Um, so there is something to that. I think that with any right wing political movement, you do have to understand that a large section of the base is in a right wing political movement precisely because it does not think in terms of its own material interests. And are led along by kind of these distractions and jangling keys and that kind of thing, right? Like that's why they, um, if they understood their material interests, maybe they would, maybe they'd be Marxists, right? So there is the false consciousness that can impede. So I don't know, but at the end of the day, whatever meme magic got these guys to support Trump and to hate immigration and all that stuff, um, it seems to be it doesn't seem to be something that the administration or that Trump's political um, apparatus is capable of directing and controlling anymore. It seems like it has a life of its own and is kind of spiraling off into some new mutation that doesn't really have to do with Trump anymore.
Yeah, agreed. They can't control it, but I don't know if it was just meme magic. I think it was, it was like 50 years of neoliberalism, just dissolving everything in the country. Like all the solid melts into air. Yeah, that's what happens with financialization and deindustrialization. But these people just don't have the right diagnosis,
Yeah,
of it. I mean, one other thing comes to mind. When you listen to right, I don't know if they should be called populist, but like right-wing commentators, far-right people, they always talk about the national interest, and they basically, I sense, just want an oligarchy that looks like them. And they would settle for an oligarchy that looks like them. And they say, why, like they do, and they say, why can't we have nice things? And then they blame immigrants or whatever. And immigration was part of the neoliberal strategy to break labor and to cut costs and to restore profitability from the 70s. But I don't know, I guess the thing that always sticks with these types is they can't actually be really dissidents, and they can't actually really be sort of anti-establishment, because at the end of the day, they're still fine with an oligarchy just so long as it looks like them. And the bottom line is, any oligarchy actually doesn't give a shit about you. They don't give a shit about you. Yeah, they're going to bring in immigrants, and the other going to, pay them less wages than they pay fewer, they're going to pay them less than they pay you, because at the end of the day, this is about profit. It's not about ethnicity. It's not about the nation. It's not about anything else. And then these people on the bottom, I don't know, is it just wishful thinking? I'm not sure. Like some kind of sucker ideology. I mean, I feel like the main problem in in American politics is the failure to appreciate the fact that the nation consists of classes, and the people who make the decisions are never going to demonstrate the loyalty to the people beneath them that the people beneath them demonstrate to them. Never. They will sell you out. They'll sell you downstream. And these right-wing types, they're just like, we're going to get our country back. It's like, no, you're not, because no matter who wins this, they're taking you for a ride, you sucker. I
yeah,
I don't know, I mean, they're right to be indignant, and even in a way, it does have to do with immigration. But the man behind the curtain isn't isn't just refugees. It isn't, it's just like, oh, what happened? Oh, or it's not Chuck Schumer. It's the class that owns everything, that uses the class that controls everything, professional managerial class. They're making these decisions because they're looking at their portfolios and they're looking at their balance sheets, and they just have no loyalty at all to anything else.
yeah, yeah. When they come to that realization, that will be a great day. But I'm not holding my breath.
Have any final thoughts?
Um, yeah, and on this topic because it's a good topic to end on. I think maybe one of the better case scenarios is one in which this right wing uh, semi populist movement, maybe that includes MAGA, that includes Tucker, that includes proponents of reindustrialization, um, finds a way to cobble together that the coalition of cross class interests and makes you know a meaningful claim to power. It probably will not be enough for it to happen in just one administration. But I think if the stars align, there is a scenario in which, um, a distant political coalition um, uh, puts forth a vision that involves reindustrialization that does benefit the ruling class, but it also, as a corollary, benefits working class through um, you know, more jobs or more investment. Um, I don't know how likely that is, but it seems that I don't see any of that happening on the left, not even close. And maybe I don't know, maybe elements of the left could coordinate. Um, I can see that happening, but I think um, if the United States is going to stay relevant for the next, I don't know how many years or decades, it will probably be hinge on the success of some meaningful political coalition to form and um, reach a critical level of success for that to happen. Um, yeah, again, not saying that that's going to happen, and it's very likely that um, what we'll actually see is what we've discussed, which is a slow or rapid decline in the American economy, and just seeing them lose dominance over the world, um, in a flash.
So are you saying that, the best we can expect realistically and the people to most plausibly expect it from are the old guard members of the ruling class who actually understand their interests and aren't just going to drive it into the wall? I mean,
Yeah, that's
yeah,
right.
that's sad. But yeah,
That's
because
right.
the left, I mean, basically what we have in this country is it's like an axe, and the right is the head that does the cutting, and the left, they're just liberals. They're the handle. Like there's nothing else. So yeah. All right. Well, should we just end it with that
Yeah.
happy note?
Yeah. Yep.
All right,
All right.
guys. Talk to you later.
All
Good
right.
talking to you.
See
Bye
ya.
bye.